Hello everyone, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and I think that it's about time we moved on with our Harvey the Hedgehog outfit, and we made his jacket for him. So I've got my pattern here, which has come from Lilly Rose Dolls, and we've made the shirt, we've made the trousers, we've made the waistcoat, and now we're on to his jacket, and then we'll just have his hat to make. So this is how Harvey's looking at the moment in all his glory, and that gives you an idea of size as well as to what kind of size he is, and he's in the 16-inch. But all of these instructions will refer to or apply to all of the different sizes that you might want to make Harvey in. So just because I'm working with a 16-inch pattern today, you can make it in any of those sizes, and again within the different character sizes and the clothes. Then, so if you're making a 10-inch doll, you can wear the 10-inch clothes. If you're making a 16-inch doll, you can make the 16-inch, wear the 16-inch clothes. Then those instructions will apply to any of these garments that you make for Harvey, should you wish to make them for another character. I do want to say a really big thank you to Claire and Richard of Lilly Rose Dolls, who have gifted the pattern to me so that I can bring this tutorial to you, and I'm really grateful to them for their support. So thank you, Claire and Richard. So I'm just going to tilt the pattern down and we'll get on to making his jacket. And so like normal, we're having a little back to the future moment. So here's the finished jacket of Harvey's. He's got his hands in his pockets at the moment, that's why it looks a little bit bunched up on the front. We've got his lovely little lapels going on. Got his little arm patches, elbow patches on the back, and his jacket's fitting him beautifully. I've made no adjustments to that at all. I've just sewn it exactly as it was in the pattern and exactly as it was in the instructions. So hopefully you'll approve of the jacket that I've sewn today and want to carry on and watch me and see how I've done that. So I'll let you get on with it. Okay, so the first thing you need to do when you've got your pattern is you need to turn to the back pages. And there you'll find all of your pattern pieces. Now the thing to remember with the pattern pieces is that the line that you see on these these printed pages is actually the sewing line. So the drawn line is the sewing line. So in order to sew this together and get the correct size, we need to trace this off and add 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now it does tell you at the bottom of each page that you need to add 1/4 inch seam allowance unless otherwise indicated, and that's what I've done to my pattern pieces that are here. So if I just show you on this sleeve, so I've got my drawn line there where I first traced it off, and then this is my line that I've then cut my paper pattern out, which has this 1/4 inch seam allowance to it. And I would recommend that you get in the habit of tracing off your pattern pieces, because then you can save the master copy, your original pattern, as a master copy, and you can save that, and you've got that forever then. And then obviously we can work with these paper copies. The other thing to bear, or if you don't know how to add the seam allowance, then there is a video on my YouTube channel for how to do that. I think it's called Working with the Pattern, and that will show you how to add the seam allowance around the curves and around all of the straight edges, and then where to add it and where not to. So for example, this pattern piece here, which is the back of the jacket, has got a fold line just here, and we don't need to add any seam allowance there because that's going to butt right up to the folded edge of the fabric, as I'll show you in a minute. But generally all of the other edges have got the seam allowance on, apart from your elbow patch. The elbow patch will be slightly separate. The other thing that I just want to say to you is just note that you've got a lining sleeve and you've got a jacket sleeve, and those have got different lengths on the edges here, and that is deliberate. So you will need those two pattern pieces tracing off. It's not a mistake, it is how it's supposed to be, and I'll show you how all that builds together in a moment or two. The other thing you'll notice is I've got my trusty freezer bag where I can write down what the designer is, the character that I'm making, and then the garment, and then I can tuck everything in here as I finish with it, and then that makes sure that all of my pattern pieces stay together. And then I just file these in a plastic container, and they're just really useful to keep those together. So just a little tip in case you wanted to do that. One of my subscribers the other day commented that she thought it was a genius idea to use freezer bags, so I'm really pleased that that's the case. Okay, let me get my fabric and we'll get started. Okay, so the fabric I'm using for the jacket is the same as I have for the trousers, which is this dark forest green corduroy. And I'm just going to start, if it's not too heavily creased, so I'm going to work with it, but you can see how it picks up all of the thread pieces that I've got in my sewing room. And in the trouser video, I talk quite a lot about the nap of a fabric like this, where it's got a certain way that feels smooth and a certain way that it feels rough. So we do want to be working with the way that it feels smooth, which is my left to right, and I've got the grain of the fabric going across in front of me, just with the folded edge here, and then my raw edges up here. And it might be that we can use some of these raw edges in order, oh, not raw edges, these scrappy pieces in order to cut out the jacket, because I think we might just get the two jacket fronts out of this scrap here, which is great because then we don't have to cut into this main body of the fabric down here. And I'm all for using up what we've got if we can do. So let's work with that first, because I can show you something called mirroring, which is really important. So let's have a go with, so there's my smoothness is going from left to right and in line with my selvage edge there. So I'm going to take my pattern piece. Now the first thing that I notice is that the pattern piece has got a short grain line on it. Excuse me talking away from the camera. So what I'm going to do is, this is a grain line here, this is this double-ended arrow here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it longer, because I think that it works better if it's longer. So in this case, if I lay one of my ruler measurements against the original line, grain line, then I can move it across it. I can reach all the way along the length of this pattern piece, and that will make a much bigger grain line. I don't choose where that grain line should be. I use the existing grain line, and then it's got, on these quilting rulers, it's quite easy because I can just lay one of my measurements across the grain line, and then that'll allow it to move on for me. So that's fine. We don't need one on the thing, and the sleeves are not too bad. So let's just extend these sleeve patterns as well. They've got plenty of room on them, so I can just draw those further up and further down. And extending the grain line works well because it just means then that you're not going to, you can straighten your pattern piece on your fabric more easily. Let me just do this as well. Just make it a bit longer. It's just easier to work with. So once we've got that done, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to use my jacket front to start off with, because that's what I'm working with, making sure that I'm having all of the smoothness of the fabric coming down. I'm going to need some pins, and I'm going to need either my seam gauge or I use my seam gauge for this, I think. Let's go down to the bottom one first, because that's got more of a pattern piece going down there. So that's 1 6/8 down the bottom there. So let me just go up to the top here, and this one here needs to be moved across. 1 6/8 is there. That will make sure that all of the lines on your corduroy is straight, or the grain of your fabric is straight, so it'll make sure everything sits really nicely. The other thing I want to just make sure is that with this pattern, we're going to be about 6.5 inches. Yeah, we should have plenty. So now I've got that piece on, I'm just going to put my pins into my pattern piece just to anchor it down. And if you are cutting yours singularly, maybe you've got a nice pattern you want to follow, then you can do the same. Or if you're like me and you're using scraps, then this is an easy way to do that. So just pin your pattern piece on, and then we're going to get our scissors, and I'm going to cut that one out because I need to use this pattern piece again further down. So let's just take this now, and I'm just going to take my scissors and just cut this out. So here's my first pattern piece cut out on the single. So I didn't have my fabric folded in half, and because of that I've cut out one, and because of the way that the grain is going, and because of the right side and the wrong side, then that's a right hand side of the jacket for me. So going back to my fabric, make sure I've got it the right way so that the grain is going the right way. Going to put my pattern piece back onto my fabric again, but I need to turn it over this time. So before I had the writing side up, now I'm going to have the writing side down, because we need to have a left and a right to this pattern piece, or to this jacket, as you might imagine, and therefore we need to make sure that we get a mirror copy. So let me just put this on, so that's at 8 centimetres exactly, and put a pin in just to hold that bit straight for me. Did shift slightly, let me just double check that. No, it's still fine. And then at this end here, I want that, so that's 8.5 at the moment, so I need to move this pattern piece back so that grain line is hitting exactly onto the 8 cm mark for me. Obviously the amount will vary for you, it's just whatever your measurement is from your grain line across to the edge. And now that I've got that on there and I've got the writing side up, I can put my pins in to attach my pattern piece to my fabric, and then I will cut it out. And this will make sure that when I've cut out my pattern pieces, I've got a left and a right. And that's what's important at this stage to make this jacket. Otherwise, if you cut it out without turning your pattern piece over when you pin it onto your fabric, you'll end up with 2 left or 2 right. So let me just cut this one out as well. And then we will then be talking, because we do need to cut out more of these, because we need to have actually cut out 4 of this jacket in total, so that we can do the inside. And if you look on the pattern front for this jacket, which is just here, you'll see that the lapels of the jacket fold backwards. And so we need to have the same fabric on the inside as on the outside, otherwise you'll see a different fabric on the lapels. If that's the look you're going for, then that's all fine, but it isn't for me. I want to have this dark green corduroy showing on his lapels. So let me just snip this out. And as I've said before, if you've got a tight curve like your arm, you can just snip straight across to start off with, and then you can then fine tune that when you've actually got it in front of you and being able to work with it. So moral of that story is if you need to cut out on the single in order to use scraps of your fabric up, then you would remember to mirror your pieces when you're popping them onto your fabric. Because if I take this pattern piece off now, here, because we'll be using it again in a moment to cut out more for our jacket, then you will now see that I've got a left and a right. Put it down on there for you. I haven't got 2 lefts or 2 rights. We've got them with this straight edge on the front there and the curved edge together in order to make a left and a right. So that's one set of the jacket that we've cut out now. So now let's go back to our main fabric. And we are going to cut out some more. So I'm going to use this section here. Just double check that nap again, see where that's going. And I can see that's going down my fabric. So this time, I need to get my jacket back piece. And because this is going to be, because it's cut on the fold, it's going to be symmetrical, so you don't need to mirror this piece. But I'm going to pop mine on there. Just make sure that your lines for your corduroy aren't going off the edge of your fabric, so that you've got that nice and straight, and that is why it makes corduroy really easy to work with. We can make that a little bit smaller. Again, try and maximise the use of your fabric if you can. And I'm going to pin on the back piece onto this piece of fabric as well, just on that fold line. And I make sure that the fold line for the pattern piece is right butted up against the back of the fold line of the fabric, because it's really important that there's no extra overlap on the back here, on the edge here, because that will alter the way that the pattern pieces all fit together in this fabric jigsaw to make the jacket. So let me just pin these on, this on. I'm going to cut one out here, and then I'll cut one out further up, and that will give me my 2 back pattern pieces. And then I'll find another area of my fabric, and I'm going to cut out on the double another of the front, so that we've got that together. So we need 2 of the backs here, and we need two sets of fronts, so we actually need 4 fronts in total, but only 2 backs because the back is double. Okay, I'll come back to you in a minute. Okay, so now we're on to cutting out our sleeve piece. There's a lining on one, so keep that to one side. We're only going to cut the 2 out of the sleeve, the outside sleeve at the moment. And I've got my piece of fabric, I've got it on the edge, I've got my nap going down the same way as I've been having. And so I'm just going to measure now from my edge of my folded edge of my pattern piece or my fabric to my grain line, pin that at the top so that we can anchor it. So that's just going over just there. Okay, then let me just move down to the bottom of the fabric piece and I can make sure that that's the same top and bottom. That needed just to come out slightly, and as you can see, it's just a slight tweak, but it does make all the difference when you're actually trying to get these garments to lay nicely. So it's a good habit to get into, and it's the same when you're dressmaking for yourself as well, or for children. So you know, it's one of those tips and tricks that you get into and then it just becomes second nature after a moment. And because we're cutting out, I've got the fabric folded over double, we will be cutting out our left and our right at the same time, so that's all fine. My lining piece, I have got some lining fabric which is here, and I'll be then cutting my lining sleeve out of my lining fabric. I would suggest that you don't cut it out of a corduroy and that you use a different fabric to cut your sleeve out of. You might be working with a kit and Claire will have given you the fabric for that if that's the case. But I'm going to use this slippy fabric because you do tend to find that, especially on jackets, you'll know for ready to wear jackets for ourselves as well, that the corduroy can get stuck on the fabric of the sleeves, and if you want it easy to take on and off, then you want something that's going to slip and allow that arm to slide into the sleeve. So that's why I'm going to be using this fabric, this polyester lining fabric that I've got in my stash already. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out my sleeve, then I'm going to line up my lining sleeve and cut that out, and then we'll be ready to start the construction. Okay, so once you've finished, you should end up with your jacket fronts. I've got 2 left and 2 right, and those are all out of your corduroy with our pattern piece. So let's just stack those all up together so we've got those all ready. Whoops. You've got 2 of your back piece and they've been cut on the fold, so when you open those out, you've got 2 of those. So let's stack those up ready to use. You'll then have 2 sleeves. Now, before we take the pins out of these, you're going to need your snips because we've got a couple of notches that we need to cut. So a notch is just like a mark on the fabric in order that we can see where we are. And we just use the nose of our scissors and we're just going to cut a couple of millimetres into the fabric just to make a little notch. Now, I've already done notches on the trousers already, so I'm presuming that you might have watched that video already. But if not, they're just little snips into the fabric like this. So we've got a notch each on the left and the right of the sleeve and one in the centre, so we want to mark those. There are no notches on the lining at all, so don't worry about that if you've not got those. But then once we've got those notches marked in the right place, because we've got to gather between those, we can take that out and you'll have 2 sleeves in your main fabric. In my case, that's the corduroy. And then if I just take my pins out very quickly, sorry about this. And then whilst I just am working with this, I'm just going to mark which is my top so that I get them both the same. And you're going to have 2 sleeves in your lining. So 2 sleeves in your outer fabric and 2 sleeves in your lining. So we can put all those pattern pieces together and then we'll get ready to start with the actual construction. Okay, so let's get our fronts out first. And we're going to duplicate this. So you're going to make 2 identical sets of this. So we want our front and we want a left and a right. So put those together so you've got your curved edge facing each other like I have there. And we've got another set just here for our 2 sets there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get a back each. So we're going to just put them into our sets first off so that we've got them and we can see what we're doing. So I've got a back here and 2 fronts, and then I've got a back and 2 fronts at the top there. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the left front, we're going to flip it over so the wrong side is up, and then we're going to lay it over the top of the back so that we can join these shoulder seams together. And then we're going to just pin that in the 2 edges there. Make sure your raw edges are matching up, because they should do. And then we're going to get, so that's just pinned just there on that top corner, look. And then on this right side, we're going to then take that, flick it over, so we've got right sides together with the rest of our jacket, and then we're going to just put our pins in on that one too, making sure our right sides again are together. Okay, so that's one set ready. Let's put those pattern pieces away in our freezer bag so that we've got them for future reference. So let's do the second one again. So there's our back and our two fronts. Let's take this one, turn it over, match it up on this side, and then the same with the other. And then we'll be working with our sew machine in order to sew these on these seams together. Now I've got my sewing machine set up with a polyester thread, and it's in the same colour as I'm going to be working with this jacket, so I don't have to worry about having a contrast lining like we did when we did the waistcoat, if you remember. So we can just use that one colour all the way through, although I will be using a different colour for my gathering stitches. So there's our two together at the moment. So let's go to our machine, let's get our needle set up, and I have set this up before, so you'll have seen me do that, move my needle across, and it's position 6.5 for me for a stitch. I'm presuming you've watched some videos of mine already in doing this, because I keep talking to you about how to set up the needle. So just go onto the trouser video if you need to have a look and see how I've done that. I'm going to take a few stitches forward on the shoulder seam and a few stitches back, and then take the pins out as we go. And then reverse at the other side once we get there. Let's get onto our other one. First pin out because it's quite close to the start, and I'm going to do this onto all four of the shoulder seams so that they're all done. Okay, so I've got all four of my shoulder seams all stitched up together now, all with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm just going to finger press those open just so that they're all together like that. And let's go on to this one and finger press this one open as well. That just helps those seams lie flat. You can just use the weight of your hands and the heat from your fingers just to get that to lie flat. There we go. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do now is going to take one and have it put on our work surface so the right side is up. And then we're going to take the other one and we're going to lay it on top of this one, but with the right sides down. So the first thing I suggest that we do is match up these shoulder seams. So I'll just show you how that's just straight on top, so it just looks like you've got one. But then if we go to these edges, we can match up the shoulder seams and we can put a pin in just to hold that together. On the front, on each side, because obviously there's two edges, the neck edge and the arm side edge. So that's a good match point to start off, and that's why it's important that your seam allowance is the same so that these will match up like the jigsaw puzzle that they are. Okay, just got those matched up. And then we're going to look for some other match points. So we can match point at the bottom of this back here, just make sure that everything's going to lie nice and flat. And just put in as many pins as you need just to hold that together. Please note that I'm not putting any pins on these side seams here. We're not going to sew those seams. We're just going to sew this seam here. And then if you turn it round to face you, you want to have your front so that they're sitting directly on top of each other. And again, match this end point here. You'll see that corduroy tends to hang on to itself. So just make sure you've got all your raw edges together correctly, and then up to this top corner here as well. So we've got this point for the lapel just all matched up together. Use as many pins as you need. Hopefully you can see how many I'm using, which will help you. And then the back of the neck edge needs to be pinned together. And then down this other side again, so let's match up at the bottom down here. And again, on these, I'm not pinning down these side seams at all. The only pin I've got is just holding my shoulder straight. And up and onto the as well. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like once it's finished, and we're going to start at one bottom edge down here. We're going to sew around the curved edge of the front and up to this lapel. We're going to pivot by leaving our needle in the work and then come round the top neck edge here to the other lapel, down the other side and across to the edge here, and then we're going to sew all the way across here. We are not sewing these side seams, and we're not sewing around the arm side at all. We're leaving that open at this stage, okay? So let's go to our machine and we can do that. Let's do the easy one first. Let's do across the back, and I'm sewing with 1/4 inch seam allowance. So a few stitches forward, a few stitches back, and then needle in the work. Reverse at the end again, needle out. Let's just take off those starting and stopping threads. And now let's line it up now, so we've got one of the edges, side edges for this curved edge around. Take the pin out because we're straight onto it. A few stitches forward, a few stitches back. And we'll just start and sew around this curve. Just put a little bit of pressure on this with this hand, and that should help us round the curve. But we'll still need to put our needle into our work because we're going to need to pivot in a moment or two, and we don't want any jogs in our stitches. So my fabric's starting to bunch up, so I lift up the presser foot and just twist it round slightly. And just follow the edge of that curve. You need to follow the edge of the curve quite carefully because we want it to be even with the other side when we do the other side. So we've got a symmetrical jacket, this top edge. And we're going to stop about 1/4 inch away from the top, just at the top here, one more stitch, needle in the work, and then we can pivot and change direction so we can follow around this neck edge. Needle in the work, I can see my fabric bunching up, so let me just stop and just change direction. Keep everything nice and flat if you can, and that will help with the bunching as well. Pins out as you go. Go around the back of the neck. Then up to this other side. Edge to the edge just here. One more stitch and then down. Needle in the work just as we come around this curve, nice and steady. Keep pivoting as you go round by leaving your needle in the work and lifting up your presser foot. And then reverse at the end. Needle out, and then we can then snip off our starting and our stopping threads. Okay, so we're going to take out the other pins that we used on the shoulder seams. We didn't sew those edges, but we didn't need to, so that was fine. So this is what we've got now. We've sewn on these two edges here, round the neck edge, round the back, round the front and to there, and just across the back here. So that's exactly the way that we've done it. Now the next thing we need to do is do some clipping, because we've got some curves here and we need those curves edges to stay flat. So the first one we're going to do is this neck edge here. So if you take your little snips, just the nose of your snips, and we're just going to do some little snip marks just about 1/2 cm or 1/4 inch away from each other, just up to but not through your stitches that are attaching the neckline. Now I am going to just take off some of the seam allowance if I can, just where it flicks up. So where you've got little ear of a seam allowance, you can just take that off just to reduce bulk in at that shoulder point. And then we kind of carry it on, putting our little snips into the fabric, so that fabric, when we turn it the other way round, that seam allowance will stretch open and give us a nice edge to our jacket, and the neckline will all sit nice and flat. So some more seam allowance, let me just trim those off. And the rule of thumb is the more severe the curve, the closer together your snip should be. Okay, when you get to the corners here at the front of the lapels, let's just take that off at just slightly wider than a 45-degree angle. And on the other side as well, where that other lapel is as well, we want that to be, that's just to reduce some of the bulk. That's how mine looks. Just taking that corner off. I've not gone through the stitching line. If you do go through the stitching line at all when you're snipping, just put it back into your sewing machine and just go a millimetre or so the other side of where you've snipped through, and just for a few stitches along and past it, and that will just help it then not be compromised on that seam and it not pull apart. The other thing that we need to do is we need to snip down these edges here. Now, whereas on the neck edge, we're going to be snipping that so that it can spread open, and you can see how it spreads open on with the snips in place. Down at the bottom down here, we actually need to make this edge smaller, not bigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some little triangles like this on the edge of this corner, like those. See how I'm cutting those triangles out? Because this edge here is longer than the edge will be on the inside. And if you've never clipped corners before and you think it's completely unnecessary, just try not clipping one and then clip the other, then turn it round and press it flat, and just see how you feel about it, because I think I can convert anybody to understanding why we need to do the little triangles or why we need to snip the edges in order just to make it lie flat. And there is a skill builder video on my channel for about clipping curves and clipping into curves like this and sewing curved seams, just so that you can see that for yourself with an example. So that's how mine looks on the edge there. So if you do the same to yours, and we're going to do that on both sides here, it just helps the fabric lay flat and not bunch up. By contrast, if you've got something called pinking shears, which are these with the triangular edge blades on them, then you can also just go around the edges on your curves with those scissors, and that will do the same effect as trimming out with the triangles. It just puts the triangles in and just reduces that edge. Let's get rid of these bits. So the next thing you're going to need to do is get your ironing board together, and we're going to take this over to the ironing board, and before we turn it round we're going to press it. So let me get mine set up and I'll come back to you. So mine's just warming up, so I've got a wool pressing mat here, which I find really helpful, and I've got a little mini iron, and they work really well together. So the first thing we're going to do is just make sure that the back is lying nice and flat, we've not got any creases in there, and then we're going to take our time and just give that a nice press over, especially where we've done our stitching. So up into the neck, we'll press our seam allowances open on our shoulders as well, and then we can move it down and just press our fronts. I'm just pressing those flat at the moment. I'm not doing anything else to them, just pressing them flat. And because this fabric's quite thick, let's turn it over and let's just make sure we've not ironed any creases that we don't want into our garment from the other side. So once we've done that, what we're going to do now is we're going to turn this round. So we're going to reach inside and we're going to turn this so that all of the outside of the fabric is then showing. So just push that through the back, and then we can then start to work on these fronts as well. We've got a little lapel there that we need to push through a little point. We can do that too. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to fold the bottom edge of the straight edge of the back of the jacket first, and let's just push that so that's on top of each other, just nicely. And then I am going to be using a press cloth. Now I use this silk organza one, and you can buy silk organza off the internet. I got this from eBay. I think it was about £10 or £12 a metre. And I've just overlocked around the edge because silk organza, it's real silk, takes the heat of the ferocity of the heat of the iron, and it just protects your fabric. But you can also see through it, so I can lay that over the top of my garment, and then I can use the edge just to press it. If you've not got any silk organza and you don't want to get any, you could also use, you know, the little fine fabric handkerchiefs that you can sometimes buy. A lot of older people sometimes use them, don't they? Or brought up with those. I was brought up with disposable tissues, but an old-fashioned sort of handkerchief like that works really well. And also a pillowcase can also work well as well, or a bit of an old sheet. So there's or a bit of cotton lawn. So there's things that you can use. And then I'm just going to use the edge of a knitting needle now, just the point, just to go inside. And I'm just using that just to push out the edge of my front of my jacket as well. And I'm going to push up into the corner, but being really careful not to puncture through my fabric. We just want a nice sharp lapel up there. So let's just work on the fronts first. I'm not worrying about the back of the neckline of my jacket at this moment in time. I'm just pressing down, just ironing and pressing the front of the jacket. I'm not pressing too hard because I don't want to get it marked. Just a quick press will work on that. Let's do this other one now as well. Let's use that knitting needle just to ease out those edges, and it does just help get that stitching line right onto the edge. And then once you've got it in place, then use your press cloth again just to go over the top, just to absorb the heat from the iron. And if you're working with a fabric like a velvet or like a corduroy, you do need to be careful with that because you don't want to be damaging the fabric at all. The same with the pure wool. If you've got perhaps you're recycling an old suit to make your outfit for Harvey, then again you would use a press cloth because you don't want to damage the wool, and wool can sometimes get a bit shiny, a bit scorched. Okay, so now we're onto this neck edge. So let's just use that knitting needle again just to make sure that we've got the neck edge right on the edge of our sewing line. Just help. Oops, rattling away. Then once you've got it lying nice and flat, and you can see how those little snips have helped that edge stay nice and flat. Let's put our press cloth on and just give it a bit of a press around that neck edge, like that. Oops, mine's falling over. And again on this side too, just to make sure that that's all nice. Okay, just pop that to one side for the moment. So here we are, we've got the same on both sides of our jacket, so it's both that side and that side, but all of our seams inside here and around the front have all been enclosed with the method that we've used to sew that up so far. So we just want to pop this now just to one side, because the next thing that we're going to be doing is working with our sleeves. So if you want to take your sleeve pieces, put our pattern piece back into our bag, so that's nice and safe for another day, because I'm sure I'll be making Harvey's outfit again because it is just adorable. And this time we're going to take the two dark green, the two outer sleeves, and I've got my right side marked for my inner sleeve, and I'm going to turn one sleeve up on top of the other, and I'm going to lay them down. Now I'm matching the hem edge, I'm not matching this top edge, just the hem edge. Let's pop that one down on top there as well. And then I'm going to put a couple of pins in just to hold this bottom edge together. So make sure your side seams match up nicely and that the hem edge matches nicely. That's where we need to be matched up at the moment. Put in as many pins as you need. Okay, and then let's go to the sewing machine. Now we've got these together, let's take out my pins showing my right side because I don't need those anymore. And we're just going to sew it 1/4 inch seam allowance along this hem edge. Just reverse at the start and the stop. Oops, where's my snips gone? Does anybody else lose things like I do? Always seems like whatever I've had just recently, then I seem to lose it. Let's just do the other side as well while we're here. Exactly the same way. And then with these we're going to need our iron again. Have the corduroy side up, and I'm just going to press over that seam we've just sewn, just to make sure that's nice and flat. And make sure your sleeve's flat, because it's much easier to get any creases out whilst it's in the flat. And then what I want you to do is to fold this over so that you match up the underarm points, which is that point there at the start of the curve on both pieces. And then once you've got that done, you can then just press that hem down at the bottom there. So let me show you again. So I'm turning my pieces around so that they're right, so the right sides are out. I'm matching up the curve on the sleeve on the top there, and you'll see that a little bit down here, a little bit of the corduroy has come through into the lining side. I've got my lining side up, and then I can then just quickly just press that flat just along there just to give it a crease. Okay, so let me just show you that edge. There you go, can you see that little edge along there? And there's the lining, and that's the corduroy, and that's given us this lovely nice cuff along the bottom here. So once you've done that, let's put the iron to one side for the moment, because I'm going to change the thread colour now, because we need to do some gathering stitches from the notch on the left all the way around to the notch on the right. So we're going to go all the way around this edge here, and we're going to sew both the lining and the sleeve together at the same time, and just put 2 rows of those gathering stitches in. So let's change our thread over just quickly. So I've changed my thread over to this lovely bright orange. We've got a couple of other things we need to do. We need to take our tension down, and I take my tension down from its normal position of 5 down to 2. And I also am going to leave my needle position where it is, but I'm going to take my stitch length up to a 3. So those 2 things should make it easier to gather. Then I'm going to look at where, let's put a pin in just to hold this seam, this lining fabric against the actual outside fabric. So I've just got a couple of pins in there just to hold that together. You can do that on both of them. Then locate where your little notch is on your fabric, and with the right side of your fabric up, we are going to sew 1 row of stitches without reversing from where the position is on the outside of the fabric all the way around. I'm going to just pivot around the top of this shoulder, and then down the other side. About 1/8 of an inch in from the cut edge, the raw edge of the fabric. And I'm just doing these stitches between the notches. And you want to leave a tail at the start and at the stop. And then I'm going to put it back in the machine again. And I'm going to do another row of stitches alongside those ones that we've just done. But with a bit of a gap so that we can actually gather this. Oops, doesn't want to come out. Sometimes it does that. And that's what you want. You want your 2 rows of gathering stitches like that. So I haven't reversed at the start or at the stop, and I've attached the lining to the same fabric. So I'm going through both layers of fabric at the same time. So do that on both of them, and then meet me back here, and then we'll start to attach these sleeves into the jacket. Before I've done anything else, I've just taken my tension back up to 5, and I've changed my thread back to my dark green thread for my top. And I've also taken my stitch length down to 2.2 again, which is my standard construction stitch. 2.2 or 2.5 is fine. But just do that tension particularly, because otherwise you may find that now that you're off your gathering stitches, if you're not careful, you'll forget to do that. And I've done that before, and then you carry on sewing the rest of your garment, and obviously you've got your tensions too loose and you compromise your garment. So next thing we're going to do now is we're going to take our jacket, and we're just going to have a look and just see if we prefer one side to the other. And I think I prefer this side as being my top, so I'm going to just put a pin in just to say that that's my top of my fabric so that I can remember. Because for this next stage now, we're going to now take our threads and we're going to separate out the top threads from the bobbin threads, and we're going to pull on the bobbin threads, and we're just going to hold on to the threads in one hand and pull our fabric up with our thumb and our finger on the other hand, just to put some little gathers in the top of that sleeve cap. And we'll probably end up taking most of these out, but there's just something about gathering it up and then flattening it out again, which just helps give you that lovely curve on the top of a sleeve that just makes it sit nicely. So that's what we're doing. We're just putting those little gathers in there. So let's do that one and let's do the other one. So I'm just pulling on my bobbin threads. I find that works best for the gathering for you. So then pull on your finger and thumb and hold on to your threads tight, and then you'll get those little gathers forming, which will just allow you to form that sleeve cap just beautifully for our Harvey's jacket. And there's the other one. See how it just kind of sits over my fingers? You get that lovely curve on it. Yours will probably do the same. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do now is we're going to take the right side of our sleeve against the right side of our jacket, and we're going to find the notch that was on the top of the sleeve. So where's that notch gone? Mine's there. And we're going to match that notch up against the jacket, the shoulder seam on the jacket. So the centre notch goes on the seam of the jacket, and then we're going to put our pin in through both. And then we're going to go first to the underarm section. Just keep your threads out of the way, and this is why I like these orange threads, because then you can see exactly where you are. So we've got both of our front and our lining of our jacket together. So at this underarm point here, you've actually got 3 layers of fabric. One for the, well, 4 actually, 2 for the lining of the sleeve and the outside of the sleeve, and then the 2 sections of the lining there. Outer jacket there, and then match these underarm points here, and then match that onto this sleeve here. And then a pin in at that point there. So we've got 3 pins in at the moment, matching the centre of the top of the shoulder against the shoulder seam edge, and then one underarm and the other underarm. Then what we're going to do is we're just going to now ease out some of these gathers in order that the sleeve edge fits the same as the jacket edge, so that we can then put some pins in, attaching the 2 edges of the jacket together to the sleeve. And then just make sure your raw edges are together and pin towards the top of the sleeve as well. You're trying not to pin in any puckers into that sleeve at all. And again here, I just need to ease some of these gathers out so that they sit nicely. Just takes up the excess of that fabric so that it can just sit nicely. And then once you're ready, you can then pin your sleeve and just gather it up a little bit more or loosen it off depending on how you need to be. And don't worry, because when you put a sleeve in, the actual raw edge here will be quite ruffled on the sleeve edge, but on your jacket edge it should be flat. And that's just the way that the fabric bunches up in order to fit into that space. So there we go, and just try and make sure you've not got any puckers in that seam at all. And we can turn it round to have a little look and just make sure that that jacket is just sitting in there that sleeve is sitting in there quite nicely, and it is at the moment, so that's fine. Just feel it with your fingers, and 1/4 inch in is where you want it to feel nice and flat, and that's where it should feel flat. And we're going to do one sleeve at a time. If you want to go ahead and tack your sleeve in first, then please do so, because sometimes a little bit of time taken now just to put a row of tacking stitches in can work really well for you, especially if you're a beginner, because then you can just check and make sure that everything's okay with that. I'm just going to go ahead and sew mine, which might be a bit gung-ho, but we'll see how we get on. So I'm going to match up my 1/4 inch seam allowance with my raw edges, and I've got my sleeve side up, and I've got my jacket, flat jacket side to the sewing machine bed. A few stitches forward and a few stitches back, and then I'm going to put my needle in the work, and that's really important. We really need to have that needle in the works. Let's then take out the first pin, because we're almost straight away onto a curve. So I'm doing that pivoting, leave your needle in the work, lift up the presser foot and just change the direction slightly. And we're just going to be sewing the next few centimetres, and then the needle is in the work again, and we can start to do that swooshing where we swoosh the fabric underneath to make sure that it's all sitting nicely. And when you lift up your presser foot, you can see the fabric just starts to sit nicely for you, as well as you're just starting to sew round. So just take your time in doing this, and just use your finger in front of the machine, in front of your presser foot, and make sure everything's sitting all nicely. And take your time with this. If you've got a speed control, this is definitely time to use it. Just around over the top of the curve. Just make sure you move the body of your jacket out the way. Things can get bunched up, and things do want to kind of, you're trying to put two different curves together, so it does take a little bit of fiddling just to get it to go right. It's very similar to what we did on the shirt. So if you've already made the shirt, you're basically repeating that process that we did on the shirt already, and I probably did it in a bit more detail there, because I know that you've probably already watched that video. So there we've got our stitches all the way in there, and I just want to make sure on the jacket outside here that that's all sitting all nicely. And even though we've got my threads in for my gathering stitches at the moment, I can see that that seems to have gone in nicely, so that's fine. So I'm going to repeat that same process with the other side, and then I will come back to you. Okay, so once we've got both sleeves in, as we can see our two sleeves are here, we can now make sure that we've not got any puckers in this edge along here. And just be aware as well, because you see, oh, here you see I've just not quite caught the top lining. So I'm just going to put that back in my machine, and I'm going to sew a bit closer to the edge. So where we've got the two layers of the jacket fronts, I've not quite caught it. So just be aware of that as you're going round, because that's important, just to make sure that we do catch that. And it can be one of those problems when I've not tacked it. So I need to just go over this section just here. Again, let me just make sure everything's going to sit nicely for me. Oops, thread keeps getting caught on the machine. So I've just done an extra row of stitching just in there. Now let's check on the other side and make sure I've caught that now. And yes, I have. So that's fine. So it's just because you're using those multiple layers, it just makes it necessary just to be vigilant about it. So once we've got that sorted, let's go back onto the inside of our jacket and find our threads. Where's my quick unpick gone? Here it is. So let's separate out the threads. We just do one at a time. We don't do them both at the same time when we're taking them out. So just pull it through, and it should just pull straight out. That's the top and the bottom one. And then here's the other row. Now this one's got caught in my stitches, so I'm going to take it as far as I can where it would gather to, and then I'm going to just undo it, so that stitch will just pull it out. Let's go to the other side and see if we can pull, how much we can pull from the other side. Not much, it's got caught again here, so just take out your gathering thread. It just means that your needle has pierced through the stitching thread. It just forms a little knot, so let's just ease some of this out now. This can happen when you sew over your tacking threads. And all you need to do is just go to one side where you can see where it's got quite tight, where you can get to it, and where it's not tied up, and then you can then just undo it and just basically put it into smaller pieces, and it'll pull out really easily then. Okay, I've mostly got it out. I'll take the rest of that out off camera, but all I'm going to do is just keep picking at it until I've actually got it out. And as I say, it just sometimes just needs to be cut either side. Let's go to the other side and let's take out the other threads. Oops, there's one come out. Take out the other side, and here's the other one. That one's come out a lot easier, look. So I've got that thread out, so now I'm ready to do my zigzagging. So I'm going to choose a zigzag stitch, and then I'm going to have a width of 3, and I'm going to have a stitch length of 2, and generally that will suit. So I'm going to go around the arm side first and do this in separate passes so that I can just control it a bit better. So let me just go around there. We'll leave the needle in the work. We can just make sure that we get around this arm side nice and neatly. Making sure not to catch any of the main body of the jacket. And if you get any whiskers off the end, then you can just snip those off as well, just where the seam allowance has been. I've got a little bit of lining fabric there. Just take the whiskers off. Let's do the other side as well. Just means that it's just not going to fray when the jacket is being worn by Harvey. Okay, so the next thing then that we're going to do is we're going to actually put the cuffs of the sleeves together, and we're going to match that cuff at the bottom edge and put a pin. And then we're going to go to our underarm section and we're going to match that and put a pin. They should match. And then we're going to start at the hem edge, reverse stitch and stitch down to the underarm. I'm going to stop at this seam here at the underarm, so just along the sleeve at this moment in time. So let's take it off our zigzag stitch. Let's adjust our needle position for our 1/4 inch seam allowance. Line up our fabric, and then we're going to then start stitching. Got a needle in the work. Make sure everything's lying nice and flat for you, and you're aiming for your stitching line under the arm. It's quite thick just there, so just be aware of that. Take off our threads. Then we're going to do the other side as well, the same, and then we're going to neaten these edges with a zigzag stitch again. So let me just go off and do the other one and neaten those edges, and I'll come back to you. Okay, and so once we've sewn our sleeves, there's one side done. And there's the other side done. Just take off any whiskers that you get of your lining, just where it's just fluffing up a little bit, because sometimes it does that. Just make sure you don't compromise your zigzag stitches at all. And then before you finish doing that, let's just tack down this seam allowance. So I'm just folding the seam allowance of the sleeve towards the back of the garment. I've got a hand sewing needle with a knot at the end. Just take the little tail off the knot. And then what I'm going to do is if I just bury that knot just down that seam or through the zigzag stitches, it'll just hide that knot for me. And then I'm just going to tack the lining, the zigzagged edge of that seam allowance just quickly to the edge of the, get your words right, Claire, sorry. I'm tacking down the seam allowance just against the edge of the sleeve. So I'm just going through the lining. I don't want the stitches to show on the outside of the garment at all. And I don't want to use my sewing machine because we've not got a visible line on the end of, a visible hem on the edge of our sleeve. It's all beautifully finished. So I'm just tacking this the seam allowance down just so that that then hides that and makes that sit nicely. I'll just show you how the difference. So if I turn this sleeve round the right way round to show you, when Harvey's wearing his jacket, he's going to have that seam allowance just sticking up just there. Can you see, just in there? Whereas by tacking it down with just a couple of stitches, it took me 20 seconds. There's no stitches visible on the outside, and that seam allowance is now beautifully lying flat. It's just there. Can you see it? Hardly. That's the whole idea. So I'm just going to tack this other one down as well so that that's in the same position. And again, I just to be consistent, just tack it towards the back. So at the moment, we've got a jacket, but we've got our side seams open. So we've got a lovely jacket with 2 sleeves, lovely lined sleeves. Our sleeves are all beautifully put in there and all going to sit nicely on Harvey when he wears his jacket. So for now we're going to do these side seams. So what we're going to do is we are going to lie them down. So we've got the outside, we know which is the outside of our jacket and which is the inside. So we're going to put the 2 outside edges together and we're just going to separate them. So we've just got the outside edges, the lining is out of the way. So you can do that by putting your fingers inside the lining. Oops, hopefully you can see that. And then we can then, by going up, just folding the rest of the fabric out the way, you can pin that together from the underarm and you can come down towards the hem. And you might even be able to go a little bit further, but it's just a little bit tricky because we've got to kind of tuck the jacket inside itself, and we'll never be able to close it properly all the way because we've got too much fabric to be playing around with. But we want those bottom hems to be right, so let's just not try and do too much, Claire. So I can see where my hem is. And I've just tucked my fronts, tucked the fronts inside each other a little bit. Those 2 hem edges can go together at the bottom there. Oops. And I'm just going to now make sure I've got enough before that so it'll go under my presser foot. And I'm going to feed that into my machine. It's a tight little seam that we're sewing here, so just take your time and be careful. I think I'm going to move my needle across to the right as well. So let's take it off a zigzag stitch onto the straight stitch, and then I'm going to move my needle position across to the left to number 1, and then stitch length is on 2.2, that's fine. And then I'm estimating my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just reverse, and then needle in the work. Because then you're going to just roll your fabric towards you as you sew along these edges together, this front edge together. Take your pin out and just make sure, oh, one pin's fallen out anyway. And we're sewing that side seam from the hem edge up to the underarm. Just keep rolling your fabric towards you. Just kind of sewing almost round in a circle. We want to finish at that underarm seam without any compromise in the fabric. You won't be able to get all the way, but we can get 90% of the way there. Let's take our threads off. So if I show you on the pattern, I think that would be easier. Just bear with me. So what we're doing on this section is we've got the side seams together. So we've got our sleeve. This is all joined together at the shoulders, and we're now trying to join our side seams. But you've got your lining of your back and your front are both folded out of the way so that you've only can see the inside of the two, and then I'm sewing from the bottom of the hem, because I think that's easiest, up towards the underarm point where we've got our sleeve fixed in. So that's what I was just doing there, and I've just had to sort of like poke the fabric into itself. But when I turn it round the right way round, you'll see that we've got that outside edge all nicely finished. If there's any compromise under his arm, and we haven't got any, but if you had, then you could just hand stitch that shut. And then when we're ready, we're going to be folding together in the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and then we're going to slip stitch on the inside of the lining. We're just going to slip stitch that closed by hand. Just make sure it's lying nice and flat, and then we can slip that stitch that closed. So I'll do the same again with this section here. Look, there's the bit. Here's my sleeve. It's upside down at the moment. This is the hem edge, and I'm going to put those together. So the two hem edges are together, but then when I've got all of the raw edges together, I'm going to just go inside between the lining and the outer on the front, and the lining and outer on the back, and I'm just sewing those two outer fabrics together. I hope that's making sense to you. It's just to try and give you a nice neat finish on the inside is the reason for doing that. So I've got my lining pulled back, so just the raw edge of my outer, and on the same side here, on the other side, I've got my lining pulled back. Here's my hem edge and here's my underarm, and I'm just going to sew that because that's what it gives you in the end. If you look round to the right side, you can see that you've got a nice neat hem there. But then when you go to the inside, by folding in that seam allowance, and then we're just going to, because that's open at the moment, I can put my finger inside the jacket, but by folding that over, we can then just neaten that off, and that gives a lovely neat finish on the inside of the jacket. So once I've done this side, and then I just slip stitch that closed on both of them, Harvey's jacket is finished because there's no closures on it. His lapel will just fold back just like that, just like on a jacket, and we'll try it on him. So let me just do those little bits and I'll come back to you if you want to do the same with yours. Hopefully I've made sense with that on those sides. And I think that's the only tricky bit, if you like, is just trying to get that so that you can understand that the two linings are pulled apart, and so you can sew that side bit. Okay, come back to you in a minute. Just to say, if this is easier for you to sew by hand than by machine, just go ahead and sew it by hand instead. You don't have to fiddle with the machine if you don't want to. It's absolutely perfectly acceptable to sew this by hand if you want to. Okay, so I said we were nearly finished, and I'd forgotten about the little arm pads, hadn't I, that he has on the back of his jacket. So let's just show you on here, look. This is a little brown leather or felt on there. So I've got my little box of scraps here that I save all of my little bits of felt in, and I'm just looking to see if I've got something that might just suit. So you can see I save all the little bits, but that's not far off being similar size to what we needed. So okay, it's not perfect for this thing, but I'm just looking at that colour and thinking that colour might look quite nice, because that also matches in kind of with the colours on his jacket. And you might have a little offcut maybe from his beige fur for making Harvey too. Let's have a look in there. So I've got some little scraps like this one here, which look really nice on there as well. And that one might just match if I make it slightly smaller. So this is why I do just save my little scraps, because sometimes they are enough just to do something with. Perhaps not on this occasion, but you'll get the gist. Do I want to use brown? I think I'm going to use the bluey green, I think, actually, because I think that's going to match his colour perfectly. So I'm going to cut out two of the arm patches. So I'll just cut them out as rectangles to start off with. And then I can trim them up once we've got them cut out of the main fabric. Put that out of the way because that's taking up most of your screen, I should imagine. So here's my pattern piece now. I can rest that on top. And then just use my finger and thumb so that I can just go around these corners. Just trim off anything that's excess. Just give that lovely, it's going to look like a school teacher, isn't he, with his little arm pads on. So there we've got those two arm pads. You can just neaten those up as you wish. And then these are going to go onto the elbows of his jacket. So if we look on the back of his jacket, so put our fingers inside, then we can sort of estimate roughly where we want those to be. And I'm just going to put a pin so that I can get them even. So where's my seam gauge? Let's have a look. So we are 1 inch up from the hem for mine. And making sure we're putting them sort of on the back of the jacket, not on the front of the jacket. And let's go down just a little bit. That's about right. That's the wrong side of the felt as well. So I've got the hem 1 inch up, and then let's just have a look, see how far away I am from that side, see even about 1 inch. So 1 inch in and 1 inch up, that's about roughly where mine are. That works well. And then what I'm going to use is, you can use embroidery floss if you wanted to just sew this on. I'm going to use a blanket stitch. I'm going to use just ordinary thread for mine, I think. You need quite a long bit because blanket stitch does use up quite a bit of thread. I've got my thread double, so it gives a little bit more impact than it being single. So I hope I've got enough, if not I'll have to stop it and restart. And a knot at the end. Because then what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take a little stitch, sort of like from underneath, just try and go through the jacket and not through the lining on the sleeve, and I'm going to come out on the edge of the patch, just through the corduroy, just on the edge of the patch, so my patch is still proud, and that gives me, so I've not attached the patch at the moment, I've just come out roughly on the edge. You then want to make a circle with your thread so that you can take a stitch through the patch now and come out pretty much where you were on the threads. And then as you pull your thread, you will make a stitch that goes around the edge of that first stitch. So again, take your thread, make a circle with it around your work, so that when you go in to your patch and come out, so I'm going through the felt and I'm coming out on the edge of the patch, I've got my thread in a circle around the back of my needle, so my thread is under my needle, and then when I come back out again, it gives you this like stitch on the edge there. You can look at blanket stitch, this is called, and you can have a look at that online as well and see if there's a clearer description for you, rather than me trying to just show you on here now. But having that thread underneath the needle when you pull gives you this lovely stitch that sort of goes into the patch and gives it that little raggedy look. So I'm holding the patch down with my finger and thumb. I've still got a pin in it as well just to hold it. Just make sure your stitches are lying nice and flat, because you want your stitches to be at right angles to your patch. So just adjust them if you need to, and you're trying to keep going into your patch with your stitch about the same distance, and you want the same sort of distance between your stitches as well, so you're trying to keep it quite nice and regular. I'm just going to go all the way around the patch like that, just attaching that on. When I get so far around, I can get rid of my pin. So you do need quite a lot of thread. I'm probably going to run out, but I'll just finish a stitch off and then I'll rejoin my thread. And I've got a new one. It's just circling that round, and I can change position and put my fingers inside from the other end. Okay, so I'm just going to finish off doing these patches. I'll come back to you when I show you how to cast off, just so that if you have grasped hold of what I'm doing, then I can show you how just to finish off your stitches. Okay, so I've just got to the end. I had to join my thread on just for 3 stitches. Isn't that annoying, hey? When you've finished, you want to do one step. I've gone through the loop and I've pulled it tight, and then you want to go through the stitch just to the other side of where the loop was, because you've got to anchor down the loop that's here. Let me just show you. So there's a loop. See, if you don't, can you see how it pulls forward? Whoops. Oh, yeah. So here you can see how that stitch there is pulling forward, and we want it to be pulled back. So we have to do like a holding stitch just on the edge there. So I'm going to go between that and the next stitch so I can kind of hide my threads. And then I'm going to go back again just to do a few stitches just on the edge of the patch. And you won't really see those stitches, but it'll just hold that patch in place. And those stitches in place. Make sure you've not got any loops. I've got a little loop there. And then what I'm going to do is just going to put my needle through into the inside and come through the sleeve, making sure that I'm not going through anything else. And then just on the back of where those stitches are, I can just do a few stitches in place just to hold that off. But it's really important just to anchor down that loop, otherwise you won't be able to hold it in place. And I'm just going to travel just between the corduroy and the lining. And let's give ourselves a little bit of a tail, just so that it doesn't poke out quite so easily. That's what I've snipped on. And that's what it's going to look like when you've got your patch on the back there. Okay, so I'm going to now go and just sew on the other one, and then I'll meet you back here and we'll have a grand trying on session and see how Harvey looks with his suit on, because then once we've done that, we've only got to do his cap. And I have to say, if you found value in this video, hopefully you've enjoyed stitching along with me today. If you have enjoyed stitching with me and there's been value in this video, I'd really love it if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. Obviously it's not compulsory, but it's lovely to know that you're there. And then if you're able to give the video a thumbs up and perhaps leave me a comment, then that also helps promote my channel. So it doesn't cost anything to do any of those things, but it really helps my channel, because YouTube then sees it as a video that you've enjoyed and that others might enjoy, and it'll then push my videos out to other people, which is what we want to do. We want to infect everybody with the love of Lilly Rose Dolls and Harvey the Hedgehog, because I have to say he is absolutely adorable, and I'm really enjoying making him and stitching him up and talking to everybody who's watching at home as part of the process. And hopefully you can pick up 1 or 2 little tips and tricks, whether it's clipping curves or whether it's just how to construct things. If you're not used to dressmaking at all, then that can all seem a bit scary at first, but hopefully I'm demystifying it for you so that you can get a really lovely result on your Harvey, and so it'll make you want to have some more little friends to make. Okay, I'm going to get this other patch on and then I'll come back to you for the trying on session. Okay, so I've just finished. I just had a little bit of a tidy up, but let's just try our jacket onto Harvey, shall we, and just see how that looks. Just hold on to your sleeves, Harvey. They're going up into your jacket. Put your other arm in. Oh wow, that's looking lovely. Got bits of fluff everywhere. So let's just tuck your shirt in at the back for now. See how that looks. Fold your lapels back, just fold those front points back just to expose his waistcoat and his jacket. Apart from some bits of fluff, there he is. How's that looking? There's the back, all looking lovely, fits in beautifully. Elbow pads are about in the right position as well, so I'm happy with those. Oh, fluff. And that's sitting all nicely. And I think he has his hands in his pockets, doesn't he, on the picture? So let's just do that. I'll bunch up his coat a little bit, which is fine. So there he is, all swagger. Just little tweaking now, just adjusting him now, just to get him to be however you want him to be. But he's really showing some lovely character with his lovely jacket on, and hopefully you like the look of that and how that's all turned out. So let me just turn the camera around and we'll have a little round up, and then the only thing we need to do then is his hat, his cap, and he's all finished. And I have to say, he is adorable. And so again, Harvey all finished in his lovely jacket. Really pleased with that. It's looking really smart on him, and his outfit overall is just really coming together beautifully. He's got a lovely amount of attitude as well, with those hands in his pocket and his baggy trousers, which just are beautiful, and his waistcoat, as I say, has just worked out really nicely. So I'm thrilled with how he's worked out. I know it's an investment in the kits, but actually, you know, when you see your character turn out exactly like it does in the picture, then it gives you absolute confidence then for the next time that you might want to buy. So again, I just want to say thank you to Claire and Richard of Lilly Rose Dolls for gifting me the pattern. I have used the fabrics from my stash, but I know that they have some kits available as well, so you can make yours look just like it does on the pictures. And I hope you've enjoyed stitching along with me, and hopefully I've demystified the process. Lots of hopefullys there, but you know what I'm saying. So on behalf of Harvey and I, we're going to get off and leave you to get on with yours. I will be making his hat very soon, just to finish that outfit off, and then he'll be all completed. But from Harvey and I, we want to say a very warm thank you for watching us, and we'll see you all soon. So take care, everybody. Happy stitching. Bye.